Good evening. Today is Monday, November 28, 2022, and this is the 127th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. My honored guest joining us today directly from Israel is Dr. Emmanuel Navon. He is an international relations expert who also teaches at Tel-Aviv and also Reichman universities are located in Herzliya, Israel. He is a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and also which is a foreign policy think tank, and also Chabad Policy Forum, which is a public policy think tank itself, and also a senior analyst for I-24 News, which is an Israeli-based international TV channel from France. Dr. Navon has been described as a new voice from Israel for his terrific writing, sharp writing, public speaking, and also TV interviews. He has authored 4 books and a dozen of articles in prestigious journals such as the Review of International Studies and also the Israeli Journal of Foreign Affairs, and also world-class newspapers such as Le Monde and also U.S. publications such as Newsweek. A sought-after speaker, Dr. has addressed the American Enterprise Institute, AIPAC, the Jewish Federation of North America, and also universities such as Georgetown, Columbia, and also Rice. Dr. Navon earned his PH.D. in international relations from the prestigious Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Doc, it's good to have you here. Much appreciated for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Doc, I do know that, I want to get into the discussions as soon as we can on the issues of foreign policy. As you know, there was recent elections in Israel. I know that, you're here today to discuss the future of the political map of the Middle East, and also how is the Near East going to define over the next decade. With that said, though, I do want to kind of deep dive into the fact that you've written an article in the past, especially in 2021, that looked at some of the issues and dilemmas that the Israeli politicians face when it comes to the issues of morality and what they have to do when it comes to the political angles that they have to negotiate, especially in an area which is so difficult, which is the Near East itself and the Middle East as a whole. I wanted to know if there was an update you could give us as far as the article you had written in 2021. Where are we today now with the new Israeli government being established?
So first of all, as we're talking, negotiations are still taking place between the different parties that together won the last election in Israel on November 1st. So we're not sure 100% exactly actually what this government is going to look like. As we're talking now, there were reports in the Israeli media of a lot of tension between Benjamin Netanyahu, the prospective prime minister, and his potential coalition partners. So even though he has on paper a majority of 64 MKs or members of Knesset, which is 53% of the parliament of the Knesset, even though he barely gathered 50% of the popular vote between his own Likud party and his allies, it looks like he's going to form a coalition, and that he's going to continue to pursue the foreign policy that has been his in the past few years, which is to try and improve Israel's regional and international standing. It's to try and widen the Abraham Accords and the normalization agreements with the Arab states, even though if he does go for a right-wing coalition with some of its members being radical right-wing, he might have face obstacles in his efforts to widen the Abraham Accords and to bring in more Arab countries. So he will face a lot of hardship internationally with such a coalition. And the last point is that it is actually very unlike him to go for such a right-wing coalition when in the past, generally his preference was always to go for a moderate coalition and form governments with centrist parties.
Dr. Navon, I know that you used to belong to the Likud party and you left it. Is there anything that you just described that might have been the reason that you may have left? And how do you see the future of Likud party, whether we are under Benjamin Netanyahu or going in the future over the next 5 to 10 years?
Look, I left Likud first in 2015 as part of my disagreement with Netanyahu's policy after 2015 because he decided to dissolve his coalition. He had a coalition which, in my opinion, was a good one. It included centrist parties together with the Likud, and he decided to go for an early election in order to rebuild his traditional alliance with the Orthodox parties. I thought it was a mistake. Then, of course, he had his own obsession with the media, trying to improve his own media coverage by taking control of some of them, which led to his indictment for corruption. So I had many, disagreements with him and his policy, and I felt I could no longer be part of his party. At the end of the day, I think also that since 2019, one of the reasons why Israel has experienced this political instability is precisely because Netanyahu lost the support of parts of the Israeli right, and he was unable to form a coalition after 4 consecutive elections. In the 5th election, which took place a few weeks ago on November 1st, he was able to pull out a majority, but mostly, as I said before, because some of the parties in the anti-Netanyahu camp were not able to pass the electoral threshold for the Knesset of 3.25%, which kind of inflated Netanyahu's result. So I do have many disagreements with him, but I do hope that at the end of the day, Israel will have a stable coalition in the coming years, because we definitely need that after 3 turbulent years of snap elections and unstable politics.
No, we hope so too. I mean, stable governments do help, especially where Israel is today. I know in the past I've spoken about the changing map of the Near East, and the way we looked at it from the U.S. perspective in the Near East was that Israel would be in a lead with a new capabilities when it comes to the Abraham Accords, and also possibility of maybe having India. Unfortunately, it seems that India may be in a different camp lately, given the Ukraine-Russia war. But we were hoping that we would see a possible new change, especially with the U.S. pulling out of the region. What is the update you could give us as far as where you see the Abraham Accords currently 2 years later, and where is it going to expand to, and what were some of the benefits that Israel was able to achieve from the Abraham Accords?
So I think globally we can say that the Abraham Accords have been a success. By the way, we need to differentiate between the Abraham Accords, which include, of course, Israel's normalizations with United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and the agreement with Morocco. The Moroccans don't consider themselves as being part of the Abraham Accords. Morocco already had diplomatic relations with Israel between 1994 and 2001. And as far as the Moroccans are concerned, the way they see it, they renewed their relations with Israel. But as I said, the Abraham Accords generally cover the UAE, Bahrain. Sometimes I guess you could put in also Sudan, even though with Sudan we still lack a formal peace agreement. But when these accords were signed in 2020, many people, many commentators, especially in Europe, but also some of them in the U.S., dismissed them as a diplomatic gimmick, as a diversion from the Palestinian issue. And the truth of the matter is that 2 years later, what we do see is that those accords did translate into very significant investments, a lot of tourism, academic exchanges. There's actually real peace going on the ground with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco. Serious cooperation in different fields, ranging from energy to food security. A lot of venture capital funds, Israeli venture capital funds investing in those countries. As I said, mutual investments, academic cooperation, tourism. And I think especially you mentioned before the war in Ukraine, Russia's war against Ukraine, I think the energy crisis and the food crisis produced by that war creates new needs in Europe. Europe today faces a energy and food crisis, and this is where especially Israel's partnership with countries ranging from Morocco, the UAE, and Bahrain offers new opportunities for Europe because Israel is a major energy player. It has cutting edge technology, and together with Morocco and the UAE, it has the potential of helping Europe to face its energy and food crisis.
No, I think it's very important, especially given the fact that there was a new agreement just signed with Lebanon, specifically between Israel when it came to energy. And indirectly, Hezbollah pretty much signs that agreement, given the fact that they approved of it. Again, I hope that this is kind of changing somewhat the map, given the crisis that is happening within the Middle East itself. I do want to bring an actor in that we haven't really talked about, and then maybe diving lower into the Middle East, different crises. As I mentioned in that 2021 article that you wrote, it was an excellent article for the Times of Israel, that you laid kind of bare the dilemma that Israeli politicians face when it comes to dealing with the Chinese Communist Party and the CCP. Many Americans here, Professor, in our country don't understand really the real political angle, given the fact that the CCP, by many here, is looked at the 21st century of Nazi Germany, especially after having conducted genocides on multiple occasions. And now starting a new military expansionism that U.S. has to deal with. Can you update the audience again on the current real politics of Israel when it comes to reference of that, specifically of your 2021 article, and specifically how Israel views the Iranian link to the Chinese Communist Party, which dominates and leads the SCO, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
So Israel's relation with China is definitely a very complicated one. It took many years for Israel to establish diplomatic relations with mainland China. Those diplomatic relations were only established in 1992. And for many reasons, originally the cooperation between Israel and China was mostly focused on security and defense. With the years, however, China started becoming more interested in Israel's high-tech and technology companies to try and boost its long-term growth. So for Israel, of course, having this relationship with China is very valuable. But on the other hand, with the global competition between China and the United States reaching new levels, Israel, of course, had no other choice in recent years but to kind of downgrade its relations with China and screen much more carefully Chinese investments in Israel, because at the end of the day, the United States is Israel's strongest ally and strategic ally, which is why, because of the growing tension between the United States and China, Israel had no other choice but to downgrade some of its relations with China, and as I said, of China's investments in Israeli infrastructures and technology. And I think that it's not only the case of Israel, but more and more countries in the West also decided to kind of downgrade their relations with China. We saw it was the decision of many Western governments not to let Huawei open its 5G infrastructure in their country. So this is also true of Israel. At the end of the day, Israel's strongest ally is the United States. And in a choice between the U.S. and China, of course, Israel will always choose the U.S.
With that said, I think kind of maybe looking at it from an Israeli perspective for Americans, Professor, how do you think Israeli government views the American attempts to aid Iran when it comes to via funding to develop its nuclear capability? As Iran, as you know, supports terrorism. What is the what do you think is the status of how the current Israeli government and future Israeli governments are going to look at the United States? I know you said that U.S. is the greatest ally for Israel, but is there anything that sways Israel to say that maybe we cannot count on the United States in the long run?
Look, first of all, the Iranian issue is very central in Israel, even though we've had, as we've said before, a lot of elections in recent years. When it comes to Iran and to its nuclear program, this is a very central issue in Israel. When it comes to the United States, the U.S. position is, and I think has been very clear for many years, which is that all U.S. governments for the past 20 years or even more so have expressed that they oppose a nuclear Iran. Both Democratic and Republican administrations in Washington have been very clear in opposing a nuclear Iran, and the disagreement between Israel and the U.S. has not been on the bottom line, but on the best way to achieve such a result, which means to block Iran's access to a nuclear bomb. And of course, the major disagreement was in 2015 with the signature of the JCPOA, with the Israeli government at the time, the prime minister of the time, Benjamin Netanyahu, claiming that the JCPOA would not block Iran's access to a nuclear weapon. So there have been disagreements on the best way to achieve a common interest, which is to prevent a nuclear Iran. But as I said, there is complete agreement between Israel and the United States, whether under Democratic or Republican administrations, that Iran should not become a nuclear country.
I know that Iran recently received its membership as a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I do know that Russia is also part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I do know that President Zelensky of Ukraine has been critical, especially to the Israeli Knesset as far as its support is concerned. Now, I do know that President Zelensky asked for support from Israel, but at the same time has voted against Israel at the UN. With Russia sitting in Syria and with the Chinese using the members like Iran and others to expand their footprint in the Middle East, where do you see the issues that could be possibly addressed by Israeli politicians that could maybe counter some of the problems that Israel faces at the international level when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war and when it comes to the type of support somewhat, as you said in the past comment, that you have taken some steps back with your relationship with China, but where are the possibilities of maybe trying to leverage the SCO as it's expanding into the Middle East region?
So on the war in Ukraine, Israel has been very clear from day one. Israel has condemned the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Israel has voted at the General Assembly consistently condemning Russia. Israel has provided civilian and defensive military equipment to the Ukraine, massive humanitarian aid as well, but not heavy military hardware. The Ukrainians would have liked Israel to provide some more advanced and sophisticated weaponry. The reason why Israel is unable to do that is because with all the sympathy that Israel has with the Ukrainians, we also have our national interests in the region. And at the end of the day, Israel's ability to activate its air force to eliminate Iranian military bases in Syria can only take place if we coordinate with Russia, because at the end of the day, Russia controls the airspace of Syria, and Israel simply cannot afford to cut its ties completely with Russia, because this would impede Israel's ability to use its air force against Iranian targets in Syria, which is why Israel has, while it condemned Russia and while it has provided, as I said before, significant humanitarian aid to the Ukraine, is limited in its ability to help the Ukraine, unlike European countries or unlike the United States, because at the end of the day, we do rely on Russia's goodwill in Syria's airspace.
Look, we know ourselves that India is the largest purchaser now of Russian oil. We know that Iran receives Russian oil, burns Russian oil, and given the sanction relief that the U.S. has given it, is able to export some of his oil. We do know that that also has led to some of the issues that are happening within the region, especially with the current attacks that are taking place by both Iran and Turkey, which have recently carried out simultaneous drone and also missile attacks deep inside of Iraqi Kurdish north. Turkey has also stated that a new multi-operation is taking place against the Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK, in Iraq, and the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces militants in Syria. According to Turkey, of course, they're saying that those are the forces responsible for the carrying out of the Istanbul attack that recently took place. And I know that Turkey is looking at an election in 2023, so they may be trying to bolster their patriot, nationalistic rhetoric in order to be able to hedge the bets for Erdogan to be able to be victorious again in 2023. Iran has also given a warning through its minister, ambassador in Iraq, to the Iraqis that they basically have less than a couple of weeks to be able to clean out those Kurdish operators that might be using Iraqi soil to attack them. But where do you see this issue when it comes to these external pressures as far as Israel is concerned? Because from a U.S. perspective, technically, we do use the word ally with the Kurds, but they're on a technical basis, and our allies are partners. So now they're being attacked in Syria by Turkey and Syrian forces. They're being attacked in Iraq by Iranian forces. And of course, in Iran itself, all the Western Azerbaijan territories where the Kurds are, most of the cities are under martial law. And there's been a lot of killing of the Kurdish minorities there. Where is Israel seeing the possibility of what's going to happen with the reduction of the possible force ability of the Kurds to be able to affect those nations that they're living in? And if that happens, is there a focus from the Israeli administrations who's going to fill that vacuum? Is it going to be the Iranians or the Turks by moving into those areas, especially in the northern Iraq?
So historically, the Kurds have been Israel's allies in the region. Israel developed very close military and human ties with the Kurds back in the late 1950s. It was part of what Israel called at the time its strategy of the periphery, of building alliances and relationships in the periphery of the Middle East. And the Kurds were always very close allies of Israel. There was an Israeli presence for a long time in the Iraqi Kurdistan, and of course the fact that the vacuum has been created in Syria by the civil war, by the incursions of Turkey, definitely has put the Kurds on the defensive. And as we know, one of the toughest adversaries or even enemies of the Kurds in the region is Turkey, which very much opposes their independence. And here also Israel has a very delicate relation with Turkey, because even though relations with Turkey have deteriorated in recent years and therefore provided Israel with an opportunity to upgrade its relations with the Kurds, in recent weeks or even in recent months, we see that Erdogan is trying to again restore and rebuild Turkey's relations with Israel, which kind of complicates Israel's policy vis-a-vis the Kurds. Even though, as I said, the Kurds have been historical allies of Israel, Israel also has to take into account its relations with other actors in the region, especially Turkey, which opposes independent Kurdistan. And so our relation with the Kurds is complicated because of also, as I said, a relation with other countries in the region that oppose Kurdish independence.
Do you think that issue is happening to the Kurds now is that these countries are trying to get the Kurds to a manageable level when it comes to their ability to leverage those countries. Do you think that's what if that's the case, that means that all these nations have kind of coordinated together to get them to this point. Is that how you see it, Professor?
Well, it's been the case since the end of the First World War. The Kurds have been, I would say, the eternal victims of power politics in the Middle East since the end of World War One. They were probably the only people in the region that did not enjoy independence, or that was not promised independence after World War One, even though they do constitute a nation with a distinctive language and history. And the main reason is that the crumbling empires at the time, the Persian and the Ottoman empires, opposed Turkish and Kurdish independence. And until today, Iran, but also Turkey and Syria, also oppose Kurdish independence. And in a way, as I said, the Kurds have been the eternal victims of power politics in the Middle East. And of course, with the US decision a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, to pull out from the region, they became even more isolated, and they became not only the victims of regional power politics, but also of global power politics.
I do know that even China was trying to expand in Kurdish North. You know, they had established classes teaching Mandarin Chinese to the Kurds, and maybe they saw them as a viable option in the future as they build their Belt and Road Initiative through the Southern Caucasus, because the Chinese have even made indications that they did not want to build that through Iran, given even the fact that they've bought Iran to a tune of $423 billion. Do you think that there's going to be any type of a possible future for this Kurdish ability within these various different countries, especially given the fact that you do not see or hear from major world powers coming to their aid at the time that they're probably in one of the worst positions they are? Even Turkey recently, with the YPG attacks from Syria into Turkey, tried to push nations under NATO Article 5 to invoke it as being an attack directly against a NATO partner. Do you see him as just being a problem for the global community, or do you think that there is a possibility that there can be a manageable future for them, either in Iraq or Syria or Turkey?
Unfortunately not, because none of the countries you mentioned is willing to grant them any type of independence, even though they had a few years ago even a referendum in northern Iraq. The central Iraqi government denied them this independence. So unfortunately, I don't see a realistic prospect of the Kurds reaching independence in the coming years. As I said, they have been the historical victims of power politics in the region, stretched between countries that strongly oppose their national self-determination, unfortunately.
Professor, I do want to look at the other regional issue, which is important as you see the politics that are taking place internally in Iran. We don't know where Iran's going to stand. I do know that the Enqilab is expanding. Is there anything that you've seen in patterns, possibility to say that maybe that the current Israeli government are actually looking at what would happen if Iranian current government collapses? Is there any patterns that would say that there might be another emerging capability, in this case, possibly Turkey, to be the regional, who has always wanted to be a regional hegemon, to have more of a say in the Middle East? Has there been any discussions from your end with your colleagues that have maybe looked at the possibility, what if?
So there have been, as we know, there have been in the past waves of revolts in Iran against the theocratic regime, but they were always repressed, and unfortunately rebellions in Iran in recent years have failed. This one, however, looks different. It is much more widespread geographically and socially. And it looks like this, as I said, this rebellion against the regime is different and hopefully might free the Iranian people from its repressive theocratic regime. If that were to happen, if the regime of the mullahs were to fall, obviously that would be a welcome move, first and foremost for the Iranian people, but also for relations with Israel, because don't forget that before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Israel and Iran were in fact close allies in the region. Iran was Israel's main supplier of oil. Israel was a major military partner of the Iranian regime. There were flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran. There was also a scientific cooperation. So Iran and Israel used to be very close. Sorry, they've been set apart by the theocratic regime that was installed in 1979. And if there was to be a regime change in Iran, which I very much hope for the Iranian people, that might enable a at least partial restoring of ties between Iran and Israel as they were in the past.
Professor, would that have to be directly between Iran and Israel, or do you see it as being with one of the Abraham Accords countries to include possibly even Saudi Arabia, who would love to have a relationship established with a new Iranian government? Which way do you think it could be direct, or does it have to go through Abraham Accord nations?
Well, one of the incentives and the underlying reason of the Abraham Accords was a common enmity towards Iran. The fact that Israel is the leading power of the Middle East, and that countries such as the UAE and Bahrain feel that the best bet and the best ally against Iranian expansionism and nuclear program in the region is Israel. So, of course, a less threatening Iran would completely change the geopolitical calculation of the countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia. If Iran was no longer considered a threat by Saudi Arabia, this would actually lower the incentive of the Saudis to formally normalize their relations with Israel. Because don't forget that this normalization between the Sunni states and Israel is motivated mostly, not only, but mostly by the Iranian threat. So if the Iranian regime was to be toppled, that threat would be perceived differently from the different capitals in the region.
Professor, much appreciated. I know there's a lot of things that we could cover. I do want to give you a last word on possibly, as we had looked at, where do you see the Near East and what the role of the Israeli government today might be heading into the future. How do you see the new map of the Middle East possibly shaping where Israel can, in advance, leverage and possibly in a position to be ready to answer the call for, as we would say in the military, for a better term, depending on the possible political shifts that may take place within the region?
So I think there are a few things that characterize the Middle East today. First of all, the fact that the United States no longer depends on the Middle East for its energy resources. Today, the US is mostly energy independent. And unlike 40 or 50 years ago, when the US was very dependent on Middle East oil, this is no longer the case today. So this is a major change, a major development in the Middle East. And of course, you had the Arab Spring in 2011 and in the following years, which led to the implosion of many Middle Eastern countries, with countries that had been artificially created by European powers after World War I, falling apart under the weight of civil war, between Sunni and Shia Muslims. And what you see today in the Middle East is a very clear division between failed states and successful countries. When I talk about failed states, I mean Lebanon, I mean Syria, I mean Iraq. And on the other hand, you have Israel, which is the most powerful country in the region, the most successful country in the region. Israel has been ranked systematically in recent years as the world's 10th most powerful country. And you also have in that region countries that are realigning with Israel, such as Egypt, such as Jordan, such as, of course, the UAE and Bahrain, which are also, I mean, the UAE and Bahrain are also successful countries economically. And even Turkey, which had a hostile policy towards Israel in recent years, realizes that it has been left out of this regional hub of natural energy between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, but also Egypt and Jordan. In 2019, a regional group of natural gas exporters was established, and this goes to show that you do have also cooperation when it comes to energy, to natural gas. As I said before, the war in Ukraine has created an energy crisis, and the fact that Israel and some of its neighbors, such as Cyprus, but also Egypt, are major natural gas producers and exporters, creates new opportunities. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was in Israel a few months ago to sign a natural gas export agreement. But Israel is exporting its natural gas to Europe, a Europe that needs to diversify its natural gas imports via liquefaction, via Egypt's liquefaction plants, because Israel does not have LNG plants. And here you see how cooperation between Israel and Egypt is creating a huge natural energy, a huge natural gas hub that is of great value for Europe. So I do see a lot of potential. I do see a lot of reshaping of relations in the region, with Israel being at the center of this energy hub, but also of regional alliance with the Sunni states in the Gulf, and with Egypt, as long as it is run by al-Sisi. And on the other hand, unfortunately, failed states falling apart, being torn by civil wars such as Lebanon and Syria. It is a tragedy for those countries. But of course, I think that's what characterizes the Middle East today, this contrast between successful countries and partnerships and imploding ones that never recovered from the Arab Spring and the Civil War.
No, they haven't. Turkey hasn't recovered from the time that the Ottoman Empire fell, because it sits in a geographic location that has to be good cop, bad cop. It always wants to be the lead of Islam into the region, but it doesn't have the natural resources and doesn't have the institutions under its control that it had when it was the Ottoman Empire. And that's why it's been driving to get back to where it was in the past. And I do know you've looked at Africa. I just had come back from Africa recently too. We are looking at what's happening in Sudan, South Sudan specifically. I know that China and Russia have moved into those regions, especially, as I've said in the past, with everything that is in the Congo, former Republic of Congo, those natural resources, you could buy the entire state of Israel. So there's a big, huge fight that's taking place. India, we thought could be a counter with Israel in the lead, and maybe against the Chinese Communist Party in the future. But India is very hard to leverage at times, even though you guys have had a major relationship with them. But there's a lot of stuff that Israel has to deal with, to include the internal politics. So we'll see where it will get to. I do know you had written a book specifically looking at Israeli politics. I have a picture of it. We can bring it up. If you want to tell us a little bit about the book, Professor.
Yes, it's a book that came out nearly 2 years ago, published by the Jewish Publication Society and the University Press of Nebraska. As you can see on the picture, the title of the book is The Star and the Scepter, and its subtitle is A Diplomatic History of Israel. It's basically I think, the most comprehensive and up-to-date book on Israel's foreign policy, covering all aspects of Israel's foreign relations, with a very wide historical perspective, going back to antiquity, covering the diplomatic history of the ancient kingdoms of Israel, covering also the foreign, I would say, the diplomatic history of the Jewish diasporas since the first and second centuries, and of course, as I said, all aspects of Israel's foreign policy. As I said, the most comprehensive and up-to-date book published to date on Israel's diplomatic history and foreign policy. It's been translated into Hebrew, French, Chinese. There are also more translations coming up in Japanese, in Italian, and other languages.
No, God bless you, Professor. I barely can speak English, let alone all the languages that you have in your background. But I do understand other languages when I have to. I do want to make sure our audience know that we were supposed to have you here last week. You couldn't make it, but I didn't know that you were participating in the Ironman. So, what made you want to participate in the Ironman, Professor? Was it just something that you want to do as you were younger, or is it something that you want to do, as you're starting to get a little bit white hairs coming in?
No, it's actually something that it's a challenge that I set for myself when I turned 50. So I decided, when you advance in age, I felt like I had to set a new challenge for myself. And I thought of this one. I'm very happy I did it. It's quite a challenging experience, and it requires a lot of discipline, a lot of a lot of hard work, but it's totally worth it. I think it was a great experience. It's the first time, by the way, that Ironman, the organization, has a full Ironman in Israel, in the Sea of Galilee. So you had countries from all over the world. I mean, participants from all over the world represented there. Athletes from many Arab countries, from the countries that have normalized their relations with Israel in recent years, the UAE, Morocco, etc. So it was also an international experience, and I definitely encourage people to take part in it. I think it's a wonderful way of testing and pushing your limits, and I highly recommend it. I mean, personally, I enjoy doing it, and it's an interesting challenge.
Well, like I say, God bless, Professor. Sometimes I have a hard time getting from my seat to get to the kitchen, to get to the food I need before as I sit and watch the World Cup. But why not? And I have to tell you, once I finish reading your book, I do expect a signed copy from you. Would much
Absolutely.
appreciate it. For our
Very glad.
audiences, thank you, Professor. For our audiences, if you go to the QR codes, as you know, you will be able to get to the professor's link. It has all his books, publications, and writing. I think is a comprehensive site. It is well put together, and I truly encourage everybody to go in and take a look at what the professor has written in the past. And for our audiences, again, as you know, this year, again, because of what's happening in the Middle East region, we are collecting support and money, if you like the type of program we have for United Assyrian Appeal, which sends needed humanitarian support to the Assyrian Christians of northern Iraq, and the ones that might be still remaining in Syria. And specifically this year, as you know, we're going to be closing out with our support at the end of the year for the South Sudanese Christian, which most of them are actually in the refugee camps in Kenya. So whatever you can, I know holidays are coming up, and giving inflation, everything's tight, but support us if you like our program. And also, since day one, Sim Production has been the one that has produced our shows. So much appreciate Fred for giving us an opportunity to bring wonderful guests like Emmanuel, the professor here, to speak to us. Professor, who knows, maybe in another couple of years, I may decide to join you in the Ironman. But until then,
I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
why not? Until then, keep moving forward, and God bless, and we'll see you again.
Thank
This is
you.
New
It was a
Paradigms.
pleasure to be in your program. Thank you very
God bless.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.